Most people believe that when life falls into a strange silence, something has gone wrong. They look around, see others producing, celebrating, moving forward, and feel they've been left behind. They mistake that void for failure. But Carl Jung understood something colder and more precise. That uncomfortable silence which makes you doubt everything you once were is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of the most important chapter of your existence. And the most disturbing part is that it never arrives with fireworks. It arrives with a stillness others cannot see. You are not late. You are being dismantled. And what is being dismantled is exactly what could no longer sustain who you are becoming. The silent crisis is not punishment. It is the invisible architecture of a new identity being erected inside, while outside everything seems still. This video will show you with clinical precision why this phase that looks like stagnation is, in fact, the most sacred interval of your life, and why those who understand this exact point never go back to living as before. There is a crossing no map records. It happens between two versions of yourself, the one that has already died inside and the one that has not yet been born outside. Jung called this territory the liminal space, a place where the old ego no longer responds, but the new identity still has no voice. And it is precisely there that most people lose it. Because the Western mind was not trained for the interval, it was trained for the result. So when it encounters silence, it interprets it as defeat. But observe coldly what is actually happening. You haven't lost strength. You have lost your usefulness to the old molds. The goals that used to move you no longer move you. The people who used to make sense now sound hollow. The pleasures that used to work now bother you. This is not disguised depression. This is the psyche beginning to demolish structures that no longer fit your inner size. It is not you who is breaking. It is the old house falling down, and it needs to fall. The mistake is thinking this phase needs to be resolved quickly. You try to rush to fill the void. You download courses, jump into rushed relationships, change jobs, change cities, change appearance, but nothing fills it. Because nothing external can repair an inner crossing. Jung was surgical in observing this. When the unconscious begins a reconstruction, any attempt at escape only prolongs the crossing. What the soul asks for is not distraction. It is presence. And presence hurts because presence forces you to face what you have been avoiding since childhood. Note the cold detail. In this period, life looks the same to anyone watching from the outside. You keep working, answering messages, smiling in photos. But inside, something essential is saying goodbye. A part of you is dying, the performative part, the obedient part, the part that learned to shrink itself to fit the molds. And the grief of this silent death is what others call a difficult phase. But it is not a phase. It is metamorphosis. And metamorphosis, by definition, is made in the dark. Every real transformation begins when suffering forces a recalibration of values, not because you suddenly matured, but because the pain made it unsustainable to keep believing what you believed. People romanticize self-knowledge as if it were an illuminated path. Jung observed the opposite. It is an erosion. Pain does not teach you. Pain merely reveals what was always a lie. And the greatest lie you have carried until now is that your life needed someone's approval to be worth living. Look honestly at how many decisions in your life were made to please. The course you chose so as not to disappoint. The relationship you kept so as not to seem unstable. The career you built to prove something to those who no longer even care. You were not living. You were performing a version of yourself to secure emotional permanence in a circle that was never yours. And the exhaustion you feel today is not the exhaustion of working. It is the accumulated exhaustion of outsourcing authority over your own life. The moment this breaks is the moment the real chapter begins. It is not a noisy epiphany. It is a sudden indifference. One day you look at the validation that once moved you and feel nothing. Not contempt, not anger, nothing. It is as if the internal switch had been flipped off. Jung would call this a displacement of psychic libido. The energy that once flowed outward, seeking confirmation, begins to flow inward, seeking truth. And when that direction changes, the world loses its power over you. Not because you hardened, because you returned. And here is the point almost no one has the courage to admit. The end of the search for external validation is not instant freedom. It is loneliness. Because when you stop performing, many people will walk away, not because they hate you, but because they do not know how to relate to someone who does not ask for approval. And it is exactly at that breaking point that individuation begins to be born. That is why I prepared the Awakening Code for you, not as yet another motivational course to keep your anxiety occupied, but as an inner map based on the depth psychology of Carl Jung, created for those who have already understood that going back is no longer an option. It is 60 days, one lesson per day, with keys, questions, and declarations that cross exactly that point where external validation dies and internal authority must be born. You read, carry out the micro-action, and record it in your journal. It is the practical path of individuation, made for those who are crossing this silent phase and feel they need an honest compass, not more noise. The link is in the first pinned comment on this video. If you recognize this turning point, leave only the word crossing in the comments below. This comment is your first commitment to who you are becoming. And while external validation dissolves, something more silent begins to operate within. People confuse this period of stillness with stagnation, but what is happening is the exact opposite. You are being structured, like an underground foundation that no one sees, but that supports everything that will come. Jung observed with that patience of one who studied the psyche as one studies geology, that the apparently empty periods are precisely those in which psychic matter becomes dense enough to bear weight. And the weight we are talking about here is not metaphorical. It is the weight of a larger life. Most people never reach the next chapter, simply because they did not develop enough ground to step onto it. They achieve something great and collapse because the internal structure did not keep up. It is like placing a 20-story building on top of a house's foundation. The pressure of the new life crushes those who did not pass through the silence. That is why this phase that seems still is, in truth, invisible engineering. You are not wasting time. You are being prepared to carry what is still to come. Notice the cruel detail. Those who skip this phase, sabotaging it with constant stimuli, distractions, rushed relationships, random projects, always return to the same point. Because the psyche does not let it pass. She collects the silence one way or another. You can postpone it, but you cannot escape it. Jung understood this with an almost clinical coldness. What is not confronted in the conscious returns as fate. And fate, when it collects dearly. Accepting silence is not passivity. It is strategy. It is allowing the invisible architecture to finish its work before you try to step on it. And there, in the middle of this period of silent strengthening, something strange begins to happen. You realize you can tolerate things that used to destroy you. A criticism that once left you feeling bad for 3 days now passes through you and moves on. A rejection that once knocked the ground out from under you now becomes merely information. This is not insensitivity. It is psychic maturity. It is the direct result of the underground work that no one applauded. And it is at this point that the most disconcerting experience begins. You look at your life and it seems the same. The people around you, the work, the furniture in the house, the face in the mirror. Nothing has visibly changed, but inside, something essential is no longer there. It is as if you swapped the core while no one was paying attention. Jung described this phenomenon as the dissolution of the old ego, and there is no word for it in the culture of results, because it is not a visible achievement, it is disappearance. You keep answering to your name, but the name no longer represents you. You keep going to the same places, but the places feel distant. You talk to the same people, but the conversations seem like echoes of a version of yourself that no longer exists. This is not a symptom. This is the process. The identity you built to survive is dissolving, and the new one has not yet finished forming. You are, literally, between two versions of yourself. And the interval between them is the most uncomfortable place a human being can inhabit. The mistake at this point is to interpret the estrangement as a problem. You begin to wonder if you are depressed, if you need more intensive therapy, if you need to change everything by force. But Jung would observe with that unsettling calm, estrangement is not an illness, it is an indicator. It is the psyche saying that the old mask no longer fits, and that any attempt to force it back will generate chronic suffering. You do not need to fix the estrangement. You need to inhabit it with respect. And the most interesting thing is that within this disappearance, a more authentic frequency begins to emerge. You begin to notice small tastes, small repulsions, small truths that were always there, but were suffocated by the urgency to belong. You realize that that hobby has been calling to you for years, that that conversation has been displeasing you for years, that that path has been calling to you for years, and these perceptions, once seen as distractions, now reveal themselves as clues, crumbs left by your soul on the floor of your own unconscious, so that you could find the way back home. And if you are exactly at that point, where the old identity no longer responds but the new one still has no form, the Código do Despertar was built for this specific interval. 60 days, 60 lessons, the Jungian map of individuation transformed into daily practice. The link is in the first pinned comment. Don't let this moment pass you by. Whoever crosses this point without direction crosses it twice. And then comes the most silent and most radical moment of this entire crossing. The moment when the old concept of success simply loses its flavor. You look at everything that always made you run, the title, the value in your account, public recognition, comparisons with colleagues, and feel a cold, almost clinical indifference. It's not giving up, it's reordering. Jung would say the psychic libido has found a deeper center and no longer accepts serving a superficial one. This is unsettling for those on the outside, because society has no repertoire for dealing with someone who stopped running without being broken. People ask what happened, offer guesses, suggest therapy, suggest rest, suggest new goals. They can't understand that you don't need to be fixed. You've been realigned, and realignment carries a specific solitude, the solitude of one who can no longer explain their life using the old vocabulary. You speak a language that those still playing the old game can't translate. The new scoreboard is ruthless because it's internal. It doesn't measure how much you earn. It measures how much you breathe without your chest tightening. It doesn't count how many followers you have. It measures whether you can be alone without feeling empty. It doesn't track promotions. It measures whether, at the end of the day, you recognize your own face in the mirror. These criteria generate no applause, but they generate something the old success never delivered. Peace. And peace is the only psychic asset that never depreciates with time. And it's here that a cruel truth must be spoken. Most people never switch scoreboards. They grow old competing in a game that no longer makes sense, collecting achievements that don't nourish them, stacking external milestones over an emptiness no one ever filled. They die full of trophies and empty of themselves. Jung would observe with that serene coldness, living without switching scoreboards is the most elegant form of symbolic suicide. And no one notices, because the facade keeps shining. You, however, have reached the point where the facade no longer convinces even you. And that's why turning back hurts more than moving forward. Because whoever has seen the new scoreboard can no longer pretend the old one matters. And still, a question remains in your head. If I switched scoreboards, where do I go now? Where is the map? Where is the certainty? And here Jung delivers one of the most uncomfortable observations in his body of work. You want certainty because you were trained to fear the unknown. But the soul operates precisely in the unknown. That's where it creates. That's where it rebuilds itself. Whoever demands immediate clarity is asking the soul to work with the tools of the ego, and the soul always refuses. The uncertainty you're feeling is not an absence of direction. It's direction being formed in real time, beyond the reach of the rational mind. That job that ended without explanation, that relationship that collapsed without logic, that move that seemed absurd at the moment, that opportunity that passed without you seizing it, all of it, seen in isolation, looks like chaos. But seen from afar, with time, it reveals an unsettling coherence. The pieces, which seemed loose, fit together into a pattern only the unconscious could project. Jung called this phenomenon the symbolic tapestry. You only see the back of it while you're embroidering. Cut threads, uneven knots, colors that seem not to match. But all you have to do is turn the fabric over, in the right time, to see the complete design. And that's when you realize nothing was wasted. Not the pain, not the loss, not the delay, not the silence. Every element served the formation of the image you couldn't see while you were still immersed in the process. Trusting uncertainty is not blind faith. It is clinical recognition that the psyche has its own cycles and does not obey the ego's haste. It is accepting that the journey has its own intelligence, and that this intelligence, though silent, is infinitely wiser than any 5-year plan you've sketched out on paper. You can surrender to the journey with dignity, or you can fight it and lose the little energy you have left. Jung would say, with that cold precision, whoever fights the unconscious always loses. Not because the unconscious attacks, but because it simply waits. And it is here that responsibility shifts to you. You already understand it's not failure, it's passage. You already know external validation no longer sustains you. You already recognize silence as preparation. The question that remains is, will you cross this phase with a map, or will you cross it groping in the dark for a few more years? The Code of Awakening is ready, in the first pinned comment, for whoever decides today that they will not let this phase pass without extracting from it everything it came to teach you. 60 days, 60 lessons. A clear direction built on Jung's depth psychology. Whoever clicks now starts today. Whoever postpones crosses another cycle without clarity. The choice is coldly yours. And then, almost without you noticing, the passage ends. Not because of an external event, not because of a visible achievement, not because of a milestone others will celebrate with you. The passage ends because, on some ordinary day, you wake up and notice you are no longer the same person who entered it. The things that used to destabilize you now pass through you like wind. The people who used to dictate your mood now occupy a smaller, more fitting space. The decisions that used to paralyze you now arise almost naturally, with a clarity you didn't have before. And the strangest thing, you don't celebrate, you simply recognize. Jung understood with precision that real integration doesn't come with fireworks. It comes as a new silence, denser, more stable. It is the silence of someone who no longer needs to prove, no longer needs to perform, no longer needs to justify. You look back and perceive every knot of the crossing with an almost strange tranquility, like someone observing an old landscape that no longer hurts. The pain was not erased, it was digested. And what was digested became substance, psychic substance, internal fuel, ground. The best chapter of your life will never be announced. It begins in silence, crosses in silence, and settles in silence. Because it does not belong to the part of you that needs to tell. It belongs to the part of you that finally learned to inhabit. And whoever inhabits doesn't need to shout. Whoever inhabits simply is. And being, in the Jungian sense, is the only real form of success. So observe what is happening to you right now with clinical honesty. If you recognize this passage while listening, it was not coincidence. It was your psyche confirming that you are already inside it. You can choose to cross this chapter blind, stumbling over your own symbols, postponing the encounter with who you are becoming. Or you can choose to cross with direction, with method, with Jung's psychology transformed into daily practice in the Code of Awakening, which is in the first pinned comment. You can close this video and continue interpreting silence as failure. Or you can accept now that it is the portal. The illusion is over. Choose.